Hello. This was covered in my previous stream when I was replying to Anne. I think it was Anne. About Anne? Or maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was just. Anyways, I covered, it was with the word and instead of or, but it was basically the same idea. I was responding to and just stuff. I'm not going to do that again. That is my opinion. People seem to blur, like, literally the definition of conjunction. But the distinction I've decided on that I think makes sense is if it's doing nesting, that's not a conjunction. A conjunction goes between two things or more and joins them. That's for joining things that are actually separate, not for nesting internally. Right, I also, I think nesting should be somewhat minimized. That's not like a strong principle or a hard rule, but when you have choices, don't like add a bunch of unnecessary nesting. Nesting adds complexity. In general, the more nesting, the more complicated it is to try to understand. It's very similar to how if you just write like a bunch of short sentences, it's simple because there's no nesting, like each sentence is separate. And then when you use conjunctions, you get a good amount of separation between your clauses. When you use relative clauses, now you have less separation between your clauses, they're more stuck together, they're less independent or autonomous, and that makes things more complicated because small parts that are independent are easy to understand because you can independently understand a small chunk at a time. But if you have a bunch of stuff glued together, you have to understand it all as a whole group. Like when you have a nested clause inside a main clause, you have to understand both clauses together in some sense. Like it's harder to understand separate parts. Yeah, I think I basically agree with the standard view on relative pronouns. Like a modifier is a nested thing. I don't think relative pronouns are explained terribly well. My view is that they have a dual purpose, like they play the pronoun role and the nesting or subordinating role. And I didn't find the explanation super clear. But I think splitting up what they do into two jobs instead of trying to present them as just like one thing helps with understanding them. But that isn't exactly like non-standard. Like some of the sentence diagramming trees of the dependency variation, which is the trees I've been doing, as opposed to constituency is a different design of diagram. And it's also there's sentence diagramming, which is a different thing, where it's not a tree. Anyways, the dependency diagram people, they vary on how they do relative pronouns, but they basically do a variety of things that fit with my understanding, including what I do as one of the options. So far, it seems like more people watch if it's later in the day. Although it's now a weekend, so they're not at work. And it's already afternoon Eastern time. Anyway, one of the key things about streaming is you have stuff to do even if no one asks any questions. There's a missing what here. Yeah, knowing a few endings is helpful. Ly is adverb, ing is gerund or participle, and en is participle, past participle. Ing for present participle. And there's like s endings for plural. Those are really, really well known. S or es in the end, plural, and ed for past tense. And tion endings are nouns, and so is ness endings. Like frustration is a noun from the verb frustrate. I would guess that it came from a verb originally, but that tion is a noun ending. And happiness is a noun. Yeah, and when you're checking for implied words, the number one implied word is that. It's so common for that to be implied. Diagram. Yes, diagrams are good. Also, there's the techniques I specifically gave in the essay of outlining and showing the clause and phrase groupings and doing question-based analysis. Doing tree diagrams does show you clause and phrase groupings. Essentially, it's figuring out what is pointing at what. It's a similar kind of thing. Yeah, this tool is very easy and will do most of what you want. And if you want more options and customization or whatever, my script can help. And yeah, I go over the diagrams, like tree diagrams and S expressions and stuff in my grammar videos. Let's see. Alright, I got the mic closer to me. Maybe that's better. I can also turn it up a little if it's still low. Okay, so this graph shows the extent to which individual differences in math-related traits are associated with differences in genes, environmental factors that vary from family to family, and other environmental factors plus noise and measurement error. They're claiming that for most of these tests, there's zero environment that varies from family to family. In other words, parenting makes zero difference in scores on all of these tests except for the GCSE. Now, this is somewhat misleading, I think. Because if you actually read technical details on what they mean by shared and non-shared environment, I think you'll find that it's not as simple or... Like, this is sort of what they wish it was, but it's not actually exactly this. Anyways, the claim that there's zero impact of this stuff is implausible. Like, they're saying family to family stuff has zero impact on all of the tests but one. That is just completely implausible. That's like a ridiculous claim. Like, I can't possibly believe that. No way. I mean, if they really, really had good arguments, I could potentially change my mind, but I'm extremely skeptical. And also, I noticed that they're using the term associated, which is vague on purpose, and it means correlated. But what they want to do is hint or imply that it has something to do with causation or explanation, but they just mean they looked at some correlations. They're not dealing with causes or explanations. So we're going to look at the actual paper. And, oh yeah, so this I was already like, I was setting off my warnings. I was worried, but when you look here, it says that they're associating anxiety, attitudes, and performance. So it's not just a math skill thing, but it's like anxiety about math or something, which is not what the tests measure, so I don't even know how the hell anxiety comes into it. Like, did they survey people afterwards and say, oh, your bad score was because of anxiety because you said so in your survey? Or something? Like, people who do really well are sometimes quite anxious about it. Okay, so anyways, they have this paper here, full text. I'm gonna put these in the chat for reference. That way someone watching the replay can find it easier. Oh no, that did not work right. It doesn't have the whole thing. Yeah. Okay, genetic factors underlie the association between anxiety, attitudes, and performance in mathematics. Okay, so I don't believe them. Students struggling with math anxiety, MA, tend to show lower levels of self-efficacy. What is self-efficacy? Like, I understand efficacy in math. Like, if you're getting higher test scores, that's more efficacious, which means effective because you're getting more shit right. So I understand effectiveness as an objective, impersonal measure of how much you're getting the math right. But what I'm unclear on is self-effectiveness. Okay, so people who have anxiety about math are less interested and they have less performance, which is apparently different than self-efficacy. Are they going to tell me what efficacy means? Their perception of their own competence. So this is a dishonest term. Self-efficacy does not mean, there's nothing in that term that says self-perception of efficacy. So they're trying to have a survey term that just means what do people fill out on surveys, which they then call perception rather than survey answers, which is already lying. Well, it's leaving out a very flawed proxy. Survey answers and self-perception are significantly different. It's not a very good proxy, so to just completely omit it is shitty. And then they're going from there, from perception to just self-efficacy, which sounds like self-effectiveness, which just actually doesn't even make sense. So something's screwy. This is pretty long. Anyway, I have to read the whole abstract and maybe the introduction before I can skip ahead and check details, so that I have like the big picture that stuff is supposed to fit into. Okay, so ability involves understanding numbers, problem-solving ability, and approximate number sense. And achievement means exam scores. They say how it relates to, but I think what they're going to mean by relates here is not what is the relationship, but how much of a correlation is there. That's my guess. And they're hiding that. They're not making that clear so far. Okay, 2. The study addresses to what extent the observed relations are explained by, and when they say explained, they mean correlated with. They definitely don't mean explained or caused. So explained by overlapping genetic and environmental factors. This is weird because it makes it sound like how much is it explained by some mix of genes and environment, which is like that's kind of everything-ish. I think what they mean is they're going to separately tell us how much is genetic and how much is environmental, rather than giving like one amount for both. I think they're giving individual amounts because that's what the graph was. It separated them out. So it seems poorly worded. And 3, the role of general anxiety in accounting for these associations. So they keep changing words. That's something I really don't like. If you mean the same concept every time, you should use the same word. So they use association, tend to show, relates. Not underline these. Nope. Under. So they keep changing terms. None of the terms are clear, and they won't just stick to like one or two terms. All of these things I underlined are related ideas. All of them, to some extent, mean we're going to look for correlations. They're either looking for correlations, or it's something in that kind of ballpark, some sort of similar thing of looking for relationships or causes or explanations or something. And they don't say exactly what they're doing. They don't use the word correlation a single time, even though I'm pretty sure at least some of these refer to correlations. And I should underline factors as well, because what they mean by factors, I think, is things that correlate with. That also falls into the category. So they keep varying the terminology. So it's both unclear and they keep varying it. And they don't tell you which of the varied words are the same as the other ones. Like, does relates means the same as explains, or does association mean the same as accounting for? Stuff like that. Like, they just keep changing words to all these different synonyms without telling you exactly what any of them mean and which ones mean the same as which other ones. That's really bad. It makes it really hard to understand what they're actually saying. They're hiding what they're saying on purpose. It is not an attempt at clear communication. Like, not a reasonable, honest attempt one, at least. Okay. So now they say the sample comprised. And that's an interesting jump because they did not already say there would be a sample. They're just assuming that the way you study this would obviously involve a sample. But like, you don't have to study this by a sample. You could study these things. Everything they said so far, you could conceivably study by philosophical analysis with no sample and no data. But they're just assuming they're doing a study based on a sample with data, and they're going to do statistics. They don't say we got a sample in order to do statistical analysis. They just say the sample comprised. Like, they're assuming you already know there's a sample, even though they didn't say that. So when you're talking about what you did, you should be saying something like, we found a sample and then we used it and blah blah blah, not just take for granted there is a sample and start talking about it as if the reader already knows. Okay, so they got twin pairs aged 16 to 21. So when I've previously looked at twins data sets, the data quality was very bad, and a lot of the data had low n size. Justin is sarcasming. It is hard to write with this tool. I'm not good at it, and it's hard. Anyway, so a lot of them had low n size for the twin stuff, and now I'm seeing 3410 twin pairs. So I think this is like, it's either one of the largest ones, or what I was looking at before was twins raised apart, and maybe this is twins who are not raised apart for some reason. Because usually when they deal with twin stuff, they want twins raised apart as their attempt to separate genes and environment, or genes and like shared environment or whatever. Negative associations. So by associations, I think they mean correlations of comparable strength emerge between anxiety and two measures. So they did like multiple measures, and then they found correlations with some of them, and then they focused on the ones where they got So they focused on the ones where they actually got results they liked, and as opposed to the ones that they didn't, I think, because they're just saying 2 measures. Wait, moderate negative and strong genetic. Do they mean strong negative genetic? Oh, there is a minus sign in it right there. So I think this is bad writing, that this negative has to apply to genetic. Earlier, they said negative associations, and it was clear. This is negative associations of, and then there were 2 things. But now they have moderate negative and strong, and strong. It doesn't say and strong negative. So I think that's sloppy writing. It's not like wrong, it's just, it should be clearer. The only exception. So when they say only exception, they're making it sound like like 1 out of many, but it's 1 out of 3. Because they said 2 things worked and 1 didn't, I think. So 1/3 of the things did not work, which they phrase as the only exception. So approximate number sense didn't work as well. So here they use fancy terms. What they mean is we did statistics. That's it. They did some statistics. They're trying to make it sound fancy. Multivariate just means there was more than 1 variable involved. It's not that fancy. Quantitative means it deals with quantities. That's also not fancy. Genetic means they were dealing with genes. It's not actually part of the statistics. Like, it doesn't make the statistics fancier that the numbers have something to do with genes instead of the numbers having to do with cats. Or levels of sarcasm. But if it was levels of sarcasm analysis as with statistics, it wouldn't sound as fancy. We surveyed people on how sarcastic they thought several tweets were, and then we put it through some statistics software. Wouldn't sound as fancy, but it would be essentially the same thing as what they're doing. So it indicated. That is another word that is unclear, and similar to a lot of these earlier ones where they say things like associated. So it indicates probably means correlates with. Maybe. They don't tell you, but it's another word that might mean correlates with. Okay, so now they're saying math measures accounted for genetic variance, which is different than genetic variance accounting for math measures. I think they're going in the wrong direction. Because certainly they don't think that math measures cause genetic variance. So they're going in like a non-causal direction, and they don't really care that there's just no way in hell that your math test scores at age 16 to 21 cause what genes you have, That's utterly impossible, given our understanding of genes being pre-existing at birth. You have your genes before you're born, so they're not caused by something that happens 20 years later. They just don't care about causality, and they will say things like related and accounted when it's not causal. Genetic effects were largely shared. When they say effects, I guess they mean correlation again. It's another weasel word. They never say correlation, they say a wide variety of other things. largely shared across all measures, but they said 2. Earlier they said 2. But they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. Why did they say 2 earlier? Where was it? Oh, the 2 measures of mathematics attitudes? Oh, okay, so they're saying it worked with self-efficacy and interest, and then they say the only exception. And when they say the only exception, they're no longer talking about measures of mathematics attitudes. They are now talking, which by the way is not what MA stands for. They have mathematics attitudes and mathematics anxiety, and MA stands for the anxiety one. That's awkward. But anyways, so they brought up only the attitudes ones. But then they said the only exception, and they were no longer talking about attitudes, they were talking about all 6 things. So the exception was actually 1 out of 6. They just specified a subset. And then they switch to the exception, and they don't say the exception from what, or from what list of things. They don't tell you what it's an exception from. Like, how many exceptions out of how many things, they don't tell you. It's super unclear. I just had to figure out later when they said it worked for everything. With the one exception. And like here, you actually can tell what all the things is that there's an exception from. So it's terrible writing. Like, they're just not precise. This genetic overlap is not accounted for. Another one of their terms. By general anxiety. They're pretending they know how much general anxiety people have, which they certainly don't. They also don't know how much mathematics anxiety people have because surveys don't work for either one. These results are important for future genetic research. Genetic underpinnings. Oh, we got a new word. So this is another synonym. So they were talking about, again, this accounted for thing. Okay, so predispositions, another thing. I think they just mean correlations, and they're pretending it's causal. Okay, so another issue is they're talking about ability. Ability? Oops. Try that again. So they're talking about ability and achievement. So you'd think that when they talk about ability and achievement, they mean ability and achievement. They do not. They mean variation in ability and achievement, which they decided to leave out. I'm pretty sure, without them saying it, that that's what they actually mean. So for example, if I get 99 out of 100 on a math test, you might think that's really good, or whatever. But what they're actually doing is they're comparing. So they're saying this other guy got like a 95, and I got a 99. So the variance is 4. 4 points. So they will look at the differences between people's scores rather than the absolute level of achievement or ability. So like, even if you're actually good at all these things, they could see you as having a negative variation on these things because you have less than someone else. So when you look at variation, you're not looking at the trait itself. So it could be that people are 90% the same in terms of math, we all learn basic arithmetic and everyone's the same, just hypothetically. So 90% of our math is everyone learns the same basic arithmetic, and 10% of our math is people vary in how good they are at math. And the variation only affects a small part, and it happens for whatever reason. Then what they would study is what caused the 10% variation, while ignoring what caused the 90% standard math skill that everyone has. So when they say they're looking at ability and achievement, you would think they were looking at like all of your ability and all of your achievement and where does it come from, when they actually might be looking at where did the 10% of your ability and achievement come from that were different than your neighbor, and completely ignoring where most of your math skill came from because it's not variation compared to the other guy. So I think that's what they mean. They have not said it, but that's the standard thing. So this is all gross, I think. So that's the abstract. They certainly don't address how they could possibly know any of this or make this not have the problems that other similar studies have. So I think they're just going to completely ignore the problems with the genre of study and just assume that this type of thing works well and then just do it. And it's not going to deal in any way with the standard criticisms. Okay, introduction. So they linked anxiety. So linked is another thing. They mean correlated with, question mark. It's another word that does not say correlated with and probably means correlated with, but they just want to hide the fact that they're dealing with correlations by never using the word. Jesus, I'm gonna search correl. Okay, so they eventually use the word, but they bury it. They do not want it anywhere near the introduction. And they're never going to say which of the words did we use earlier meant correlated. Okay, so where were we? Introduction. Anxiety is a widespread phenomenon. 30% of 15-year-olds across multiple countries in the OECD reported feeling anxious or incapable when solving a mathematics problem. Maybe that's not an anxiety problem. Maybe that's because they were incapable. Maybe it's an ability problem. That would be my first guess as the main thing going on. Like, I think the lack of ability causes the negative feelings and so on. But they're just like, look, anxiety is the problem. People feel anxious. That's bad. Okay, also, I note that they're talking about 15-year-olds, but their own study deals with 16 to 21-year-olds, not 15-year-olds. So the belief that whatever applied to 15-year-olds would apply to 16 to 21-year-olds is an assumption they're making with no argument, no evidence, no reasoning, no acknowledgement that it is an assumption or matters or means anything. So they're just imprecise. They don't care about details. That's bad. If you're actually a scientist, you have to look at every fucking little thing and say, could this possibly be a reason that would make our study wrong? Is this a source of error? And you note them all down, and then you say why you think some of them are okay. But you have to note your sources of error. And this is a source of error because the ages are different. And they decided age was relevant. Like the fact that they're picking people from an age range instead of people of arbitrary ages. Like they don't mention height here. They think height doesn't matter. So they're not worrying about what height the twins they used were. But they are worrying about age. They think age is relevant. They think if it was a 50-year-old or a 5-year-old, it would be different. Which is totally reasonable, by the way. They don't explain that, at least so far. But it's reasonable. But if you think age matters, then you have to think this is a different age. It's not in the age range we used. We excluded 15-year-olds for whatever reason. Like, there was some reason they excluded 15-year-olds. And now they're talking about 15-year-olds. And in general, they want the more data they can get, the better. So if they could include 15-year-olds, like you would think they would. Like, why not just go from like age 12 to 24? And then you have more twin pairs. So if they're excluding, there's generally a reason. And so they're ignoring, does the reason they excluded 15-year-olds have any bearing on then the use of 15-year-olds as a reference point? Due to high incidence and hindering consequences. It's important to understand the etiology of the association between MA and the attitude of... This is just fancy shit that says, because anxiety was bad for kids, we're going to try to study it. Which, by the way, they cite like some other studies about MA being bad for kids or whatever. And you could go look at those, and then you'd have like another study to read. And it would also have a lot of the same flaws. But it's sort of a never-ending rabbit hole of each study says, oh, well, this other study proved some of our points for us. And then you have to look at that one. And then it will cite some other studies, and you have to look at that, and so on and so forth. To really go into depth on like what the field as a whole is claiming, you have to go, because none of the studies like stand on their own. They're all incomplete and relying on the correctness of other studies. So in some ways that makes it easier because no one will treat it this way, but actually if you refute like one of these studies, then you ought to be able to also refute like all the linked studies that referred to it, because that shows that the authors were relying on something incorrect. They did not notice the incorrectness, so that alone means that their ability to check if their own study was correct is inadequate. And also they used it in some part of their argument, so now their argument has to be redone. Like, their studies are just invalid until rewritten to no longer use the linked study that got refuted. No one views it that way, though. They won't take seriously that if I refuted like one study, then like hundreds of people would have to retract. All right. This study investigates the extent to which so they say underlie the associations, which I guess means correlate. There's this overlapping thing again, which they're not clear on exactly what they mean by it. So hopefully they'll have more details on the overlapping later. And then it provides a foundation for the search for genetic variants linked, so that means correlated, individual difference. And when they say differences, that shows that they're talking about variation between individuals, so only what's different between individuals. So if individuals are 90% the same, they're only looking at the different part, which is misleading. Because you think they're explaining, like, how do we learn math, but they're only trying to explain or correlate or whatever. How do we become different about math than the next guy? They totally ignore, like, whatever part of learning math just, like, works really well for everyone. Or fails for everyone as well. That also gets ignored. And they don't clearly, say that. The study can inform developmental research. Genetic predisposition. You know sort of what they're going for here. They're trying to say genes have a big role in our life, and if we measure the genes of kids, then we can tell them like what type of classes they should take in school and stuff, and they'll be more successful. And this will do a better job than just like, looking at their grades in early school years or something. I don't know why though, because if genes are so important, then their grades in the early math classes would correlate with their genes, and then you wouldn't need to actually measure their genes. It's unclear why that would be better, or if it would be better, or whatever. So, associated. So we have another probably correlation word, but they don't want to tell us clearly what it means. Associations Oh, and now they're talking about interventions. So interventions are extremely important concept. This is what can you do to change something, like to get a different outcome. Now, in general, if you think something is caused by a gene, there are no interventions that actually should matter much because the gene causes it. You can only intervene if it's a gene environment interaction, and then you can change the environment and get a different interaction. But if it's actually just caused by a gene, then changing the environment shouldn't matter. Like, a lot of what they're saying is a bunch of stuff is genetic, not caused by environment, which means non-genetic interventions aren't going to do anything. Now, the other things that are very relevant are when you only study differences in traits, the variation in traits between people, then you don't know much about interventions, because an intervention might change the base stuff that isn't the variation. You might cause additional variation in a part that was not previously varying. And anyways, current correlations do not tell you what the correlations would be after you intervene. So the fact that in the current gene meme environment you get certain correlations does not mean that if you did an intervention, you would then have all the correlations be the same. The correlations could easily change as part of your interventions. So what they need for the interventions to work is something like their correlations hold constant under their intervention, but that's just not a correct assumption. And they claim to be like fostering mathematics learning. What they're really fostering, supposedly, is differences in variation between people. So it's not the absolute level of learning that they're actually worrying about. It's how your learning compares to your neighbors. So it's sort of like catching the slow students up to the better students is what their goal is, which they don't actually say. But a better goal, perhaps, would be to say double the learning of everyone. You know, ignore the variation and just get everyone to learn twice as much in a non-varying way, even if the variation between people gets bigger. That could be way better. Right, so the Ratway had a question. So this depends on context. Whether you have to say you disagree with someone depends on the situation. So, for example, if you're in a lecture, you don't have to shout from the audience to the guy on stage, I disagree with that thing you just said. You're not expected to give your feedback during a lecture. Similarly, if you watch a YouTube video, you could say that you disagree in comments. That would not be inappropriate. You know, you're certainly allowed to, you wouldn't be interrupting. But you don't have to. No one knows you watched the video. You're not really giving approval to that video just because you watched it and didn't post a comment on YouTube. And YouTube comments are not a serious forum. They're not like very important, so I wouldn't worry about it very much. If you're having a conversation with someone and they say something, you don't necessarily have to say you disagree. It sort of depends how it comes up. Like, would they expect that you disagree or agree? Did they ask your opinion? Did they say things that suggest they think you have a certain opinion? Are they assuming you agree with them and like building on it? And do they say things like you know, or other little like interjections that kind of imply that you're following along and agreeing with them? And there's all sorts of little social cues that affect whether someone actually expects you to agree with them or not. There's also like, is it an intellectual context? Is it disagreeing about ideas, or is it just like gossip and shit? Because I think the standards are a bit different when it comes to gossip than philosophy. So you should try to be aware of tacit approval in general. It's an important issue. It comes up sometimes, but it's not a universal issue. It's very contextual based on what the situation is. the more you're in a situation where like debate is appropriate and it's supposed to be like an intellectual forum, the more you ought to be speaking up and saying you disagree. But if you're at like a dinner party and someone says something negative about Trump, and you don't, start a political debate, that doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with them. It's perfectly reasonable. Like, a lot of people are at that dinner party are thinking no one should bring up politics, we don't want to fight. If you don't engage with politics, a lot of people are going to be like grateful and think it was a reasonable thing to do, and they're not going to assume everyone agrees with the guy who is so rude as to bring up a controversial political issue and potentially start a fight. They think he was speaking out of turn and inappropriately, and so some people will see the situation as everyone else is just trying to like change the topic, and then that doesn't say anything about whether they agree with him or not. Okay, so I got to here. Research has indicated. So what research and how? Well, we've got a cite. The nature, effects, and relief of mathematics anxiety. Anyways, I'm going to try to focus on this research, like whatever they figured out or studied or whatever. None of this tells you whether being bad at math causes math anxiety or whether math anxiety causes being bad at math. Like, which one comes first? It also doesn't tell you things like how accurate the surveys are and how much people just lie on surveys or are careless on surveys or whatever, or say what they think the people want to hear. Might be related to holding negative beliefs about competence in the subject, or it could be related to actually being incompetent in the subject. That would be my first guess. People who got higher grades early on, in other words, people who were better at math, probably, did better later. Somehow that is telling us that anxiety is the issue. A sample of young children. Now, how young are they talking about? Is this relevant? Because the current study deals with 16 to 21-year-olds. And young children sounds like, I don't know, 6 to 8. Maybe younger, who knows? Let's see if it'll tell us. Oh, it wasn't actually taking us to the new study? Okay, so it took us to the footnote, and then I have to click here. And then we get this, and then I click here. Anxiety at this age. Okay, what age? Did they say the age? I was trying to skim for numbers. Okay, I saw this 12, but it's not an age. Wait, with 9 children? Oh, they found 296 people? That was just some early part. Okay. At this age, what age? Okay, so young children is less than an adolescent. Here we go. Oh yeah, they mentioned first, second, and third grade children up here. Okay, so it's 7 to 10. So this is for 7 to 10-year-olds. The current study is for 16 to 21-year-olds. And they're just bringing it up with no mention of how big the age difference is. This is like when they were using 15-year-olds earlier, except much, much worse. Because 7 to 10 age and 16 to 21, those are like very different people. That's like a time period in one's life when one changes a lot. So what they're doing is what I call like argument spaghetti. They're trying to take everything that they think helps their case, maybe, and throw it at the wall and hope it sticks. It's just take a bunch of arguments of whatever quality, as long as it's on their side, and then throw it out there and hope that altogether it adds up to a good argument. And this is very bad for 2 big reasons. I don't know how many reasons I'm going to say. Okay, reason number 1. It's biased. It's not objective. They're not looking at counter arguments. They're only looking at their side. And reason 2, they're not actually trying to make a good case. They're not figuring out like what is a decisive case that ought to persuade people. They're just throwing arguments out there without much concern for quality. And 3, they think that like a bunch of bad arguments will somehow add up to a good one, or maybe they're hoping there's a good one in the mix, but it's not good. They can't tell which one's good. Alan, I don't know what 2 plus minus 10 is in relation to. That sounds like a lot of variance, though. Message restricted? What the fuck? Oh, retracted? Not restricted. I guess he's gonna rewrite it. I'm gonna switch to live chat, though, in case it helps. I don't know what the lol is a reply to, by the way. There's maybe a 5-second delay between when I talk and when people can hear me. Something like that, ballpark, I think. Oh, they want to address a literature gap. The literature gap is not about age. The literature gap is about MA relationships between certain things. Yes, my yes or no philosophy deals with the issue of just throwing a bunch of support at stuff. Like, one of the main ideas it deals with is whether you can evaluate ideas by, like, a point system. The degree of goodness, and then each argument adds more degree of goodness or more points. And I refute that and explain a superior epistemology. Dyscalculia. How do you know it's as a result of a brain disorder? Like, I get you can test them and find that they're bad at math, but how do you know it's a brain disorder? And how do you just, what counts as a severe difficulty? Like, maybe they're severely uninterested or they severely hate their teachers. Maybe they can't do certain calculations because they don't know how, which is different than being able to unable to calculate. Like, it's a different thing if you don't know what calculation to do versus you're unable to do the calculation. I think they mix those up. This is probably not like a proper definition anyways. Right, or vice versa. Students with weaker performance have higher levels of surveyed anxiety. It's not surprising. Like, why would that even be news? People who are bad at things are more nervous about doing those things and try to avoid it and stuff. Okay, so yes, being bad at math does not mean you're dumb in general. People have some math specific skill. Like, while I don't at all trust how they studied this or this research or whatever, like, I already have a pre-existing agreement with this claim based on, conceptual reasoning. It makes sense that someone can be smart in some ways and not smart in some other ways. Like, bad at math, but good at reading and verbal shit and grammar. There's some connection between, like, all types of cognitive ability, but being a specialist is really common. It is really common that someone is good at some things and not others. There are lots of physicists who are good at physics but not art. There are lots of artists who are good at art but not physics, etc. Yes, the punishments are certainly a relevant factor that would increase nervousness. So now they say as early as primary school, which is interesting because they make that sound like a good thing, like it applies at more ages. Whereas I think it's a bad thing because they're studying 16 to 21-year-olds. The further away you are in age, the less relevant it is. So as people get older, they change less. Their traits become more stable. Yeah, we already knew that. Adults change less than children. It is partly explained by them staying bad at math. Yup. Okay, blah blah blah. So by explained, they mean correlated with, presumably. Right, so people who are anxious in general and people who are anxious about math are not going to have full overlap. You can be like pretty calm in general but really hate math. And you can also be a really anxious, nerdy person in general, like that's sort of a stereotype, but actually be really calm and good because you're good at math. So it can easily go either way, or these don't have to go together. And this list is interesting because heartbeat and pulse are things they can measure, and they're talking about physiological manifestations. And then they mention two things they can measure, and then they mention nervous stomach. And nervous stomach sounds to me like a survey question rather than a measurement. And nervous stomach sounds like something that can often be psychological rather than physiological. Like people often, they get nervous and then they make up like things that seem like physical sensations to them. They feel like butterflies in their stomach or whatever. That doesn't mean you have physical butterflies in your stomach or like any physical sensation. That can be all in your head. So they're calling it a physiological manifestation, which means not all in your head. And then they're bringing up something which I'm pretty sure can just be all in your head. Although it does depend on what nervous stomach means. So iPDF, $40. Are they at least gonna give me the fucking abstract? Well, I noticed male pattern baldness as one of the keywords. Wait, soda water? Like, what the fuck? And there's no abstract. Male pattern baldness, soda water. What the fuck? Wait, there's some abstract, but not on this page, but Google Scholar has it? Key here is a crippling disease that has a vice grip on the nation. It is lowering the gross national product, causing whole communities to break out in hives. This isn't sounding like serious mathematical research so far, and convincing many people to stay at home with the covers over their heads. Of course, I could only be talking about math anxiety. The poison ivy of the soul has a long and mangy history. Isaac Newton himself had such a bad case that he wrote the Principia Mathematica. While he wrote it, he was shaking from head to foot. Joseph Louis Lagrange was bedridden for a week before he... Wait, seriously? What the fuck? Okay, this seems like a bad fucking joke. And they're citing it. Which to me means that these people are unserious. Like, why on earth would you cite this? Like, this is so disreputable. Like, they're just speaking in metaphor. It's like poetic. This isn't research. This isn't science. It's not trying to even pretend to be science. I mean, it's in the Mathematical Intelligencer. Let's look up that journal. Published by Springer Verlag. Part of Springer Nature since 2015. Aims at a conversational and scholarly tone, rather than technical and specialist tone. Uh-huh. Well, this was certainly conversational. Anyway, so they're citing that for their nervous stomach claims. I'm gonna move on. Okay. Uh-huh. By the way, they keep mentioning twin studies. They've not yet mentioned if they're twins separated at birth or something like that, or not. Like, they haven't explained anything about the twin study. Okay, study of twins born in the UK between 94 and 96. Okay. So they think it is a good sample. How the hell do they know he was shaking while he wrote Principia Mathematica? Like, was he shaking the whole time? Do they have a source on that? I don't see a footnote. But I think Zhao is joking anyways. I think it's weird that the abstract is not available on the paywall site. Why don't you get the book? Okay, here's the paper. So we can now look at more of the paper. So it doesn't seem to have OCR probably, like the text looks shitty. Let's see, nervous. Well, errata. Oh, okay, so it is OCR'd. Wait, seriously? Did I find the wrong paper? Because it should say something about nervous stomach. Like, okay, nervous stomach goes to site number 30. Site number 30 is this fucking paper right here that does not contain the words nervous or stomach unless the OCR is bad enough that the search didn't work. Overcoming Math Anxiety, Colin Adams. Adams C. This is the right paper. Symptoms of math anxiety. It mentions rapid heartbeat and rapid pulse. On like a list of potential symptoms. But did they actually, do a study? What did they say about this? Okay. Okay, so when I read this, I thought they meant there is like scientific research in which they associated these things. Like, I think that's what they're suggesting. This is actually short enough to just skim. Like, the whole thing's a joke. Will there ever be a vaccine for math anxiety? And if so, will it be one of those you should swallow a pink cube of sugar? We need ambulances to rush those with sudden onset math anxiety to emergency rooms staffed by ready PhD math educators, quarantine wings in hospitals to prevent Ebola-like epidemics, and big federal grants. So I think that they're making fun of the concept of math anxiety, and then the people who are taking math anxiety seriously accidentally cited them. Like, do they not read the shit they cite? Like, what the fuck? They cited it like it was scientific research that mentioned nervous stomach. Okay, let's search for butterflies. Well, they don't have butt. There's probably something related on this list because it goes all the way up to the letter Z. I think that's intentional. They made up 26 things. Wait. For each of the symptoms that you checked off, write down the number 69986. Add these numbers together. divide by 2 pi, take the natural log of the result, add 1.145 and subtract 1.946, exponentiate the result. If you're now sweating profusely and feel as if you had eaten bad tuna, you have math anxiety. Yeah, this is a joke. This is literally a joke paper. It is not a conversational research paper. It is a joke on purpose. Sucking your thumb, rapid heartbeat, rapid pulse, rapid heartbeat but no pulse. Rapid pulse but no heartbeat. No pulse or heartbeat. Yeah, they're fucking joking. Putting pencils in your nostrils or ear holes. Yes, this is much worse than the site Jordan Peterson did. Well, yeah. Like, his was actually a, reputable paper in the field that was, like, almost relevant or something. That people wouldn't be embarrassed to cite. This one, I don't know what the fuck they were doing citing it. Okay, so it seriously does not talk about nervous stomach. Well, I mean, they did mention bad tuna. They didn't mention suffering from gastronomic masochism. I think if you feel like you're eating bad tuna, that would be nervous stomach. It's certainly not research like they suggested it was. I think they're citing it for the symptoms of math anxiety list, which they decided to take seriously, which has rapid heartbeat and rapid pulse on it. Oh, extreme nausea could be considered to mean nervous stomach, I guess. It was like vaguely in the ballpark. I don't know. What the fuck is wrong with these people? How do you cite this joke as for your research? What the fuck? Like they're usually bad, like all the stuff I said before this point, but not this bad. Although I don't check a lot of their sites. But what the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? They just throw that in the middle of their list of 57 citations and say, look how well researched our shit is. And then Google, and then you actually go to the page and they hide the abstract so you don't even know what it is. Okay, I'm now gonna skim more aggressively because fuck these people so much. See some other paper for information on the twins' early development study sample. Okay, well, here's their website. They have identical and non-identical. How many were raised apart? It just says all twins born in England and Wales, so I think it's just any twins. Okay. Well, let's see. Well, one of them has an email. Is that like clickable or something? No? Okay, I'm gonna have to do the like new email. We're gonna go back and forth. M.Malan Feeney at Qmall. AC.uk. The feeling you are running out of ideas but must complete a list. That's a pretty funny way to end it. I need a link. Anyway, yeah, emailing them was a good idea, I think. Okay, I also want to put this on Twitter, because I got this shit from Twitter. This was tweeted by Stukio. Oops. Retweet with comment. Okay, I think that was strongly worded enough for the situation. I now need to self-reply. Is it this? Yeah. I mean the cited article. Is that clear? Yep. Notification. Oh, Alan Forrester liked 7 of your tweets. By the way, Alan, why do you like stuff instead of retweeting it? Because retweets actually show it to people. I rarely like things on Twitter because I think it's kind of pointless. I use like as a bookmark. I think they added a bookmark feature, but I occasionally just like things if I think I might want to find them in the future. Yeah, I think it being a preprint is no excuse. Increased heartbeat and rapid pulse the same thing. Yeah, they're basically the same thing. That is a good point. Like you could measure them separately, I guess. Oh no. Maybe they're not always the same. Maybe something can make them different. Like if you have an artery blockage, you might have like a slow pulse while your heart is beating rapidly and trying to get it to pulse or something. I guess that would cause like a weak pulse though, not a slow pulse, probably. I don't know, I find it weird that they copied that shit from the bullshit paper. And then but then they put nervous stomach, which was not on the list. Like the closest thing was like the nausea or the bad tuna. Anyways, where was I? I was here. Oh yeah, I looked up the twin study stuff just to see that they weren't separated at birth. And then I read this stupid thing. I'm gonna check if 30 is cited a second time just in case, you know? Okay, they do not cite it again. Methods. Okay, this is the part where we actually see what their research was. And we'll get to criticize them, maybe. Oh, so they actually don't deal with 17-year-olds? Not important. Okay. Age 16, they contributed math data. Oh, so earlier they said they had 3410 pairs of data, but then for some of the data they only have 2505 pairs. And then at age 18 to 21. Okay, wait. What the fuck? They get their achievement data, their self-efficacy data, and their interest data at age 16. And then they get their anxiety data at age 18 to 21, like 2 to 5 years later. They're measuring things like years apart that they're trying to connect. Jesus. Usually it's not that bad. Usually they get the data like at roughly the same time. You know, like a few weeks apart or something. All individuals with major medical, genetic, or neurodevelopment disorders were excluded from the dataset. I don't think it's a big deal in the sense that all the studies are like this in general. Like, they're all retarded. And I say retarded lightly. Seriously, every time I read a study, it's terrible. Like, in this kind of field. I mean, that site was particularly egregious, but the other ones are not actually better. If you want to make a blog post, you can make a blog post. You can, like, make a highlight of my video and, like, embed it in your blog post. And then you can do some research into how popular this paper is and how many people are believing this bullshit. By the way, do you want to bet on whether the peer review process that didn't happen yet would catch this particular error? Because I have a guess about whether it would or not. And my guess is it would not. They have different buttons here. Article usage. Okay, so they've had... Wait, seriously? So, like, they've had, like, 850 people have gone to the article, of which 3 of them have clicked through to the full text page that I was reading. Although, admittedly, like, over 100 clicked through to the PDF. Oh, last 6 months. But still, the full text page, like, almost no one clicks on. That's interesting. Tweeted by 29. Anyways, what I was going to say is you could research how much people are paying attention to it. I'll just go to my minimal feed. It shouldn't be hard to find. Scroll down. Look for a graph thing. Wait, where the fuck was it? Okay, let's just go to my own feed then. Okay, here we go. Not blocked yet. So this has 45 retweets, 105 likes. This guy has 55,000 followers. He has a second book. He has a website. So yeah, you can see, like, people who write books look at psych research like this, pay no attention to whether it's true, and then put graphs on Twitter. I'm wondering if that graph comes from the paper or if he, like, colored it in. Oh no, it's from the paper. Okay, he just literally, like, screenshots a graph from a paper and tweets it. I think it's hilarious that the satire article is actually making fun of their field and suggesting that they don't deserve research funding, and that's what they cited. Like, it actually mentioned federal grants while taunting them. So it's basically saying that this paper should not exist, and they cited it. It measures abbreviated math anxiety scale. So it's a survey. Rate how anxious they would feel hypothetically in situations. There are 9 questions on a 5-point scale ranging from not nervous at all to very nervous. Two items were adapted from the original version to make them age appropriate for the current sample. They actually changed the survey, so it's different than the ones that are normal. Like, the survey has been used before, and their belief is that it works well, and then they changed it, and they have no research showing that their changes are okay. I think. I don't know what... Okay, what is excellent internal validity and retest reliability? So retest reliability means that if you survey the same person multiple times, you get similar answers. Also, is 0.85 actually excellent for that? Like, that means that their answers are changing to some extent. And anyways, excellent internal validity. Does that mean they don't contradict themselves? Like, they don't give contradicting answers or something? They ought to, like, explain these things. Oh, wait. Oh, and that's the AMAS. That's not their own shit. So they mean the AMAS in general. According to this other paper, has those traits. But they changed it. Anyway, so the changes were these things, but they don't say what they changed from what to what. So I think these are the new versions, listening to a maths lecture and reading a maths book. I noticed this is country specific, which is interesting. Like, that's not what you say in the US. That's UK terminology. We just say math book or math lecture, like no apostrophe and no S in the US. So I'm curious if this is actually a UK, the UK only thing. Jesus. Alright, fuck that. But I'm gonna look at their site. PubMed, it's on PubMed. Oh, well, Google Scholar. This is from the University of Tennessee. So it's apparently not UK specific? Is that what they changed? Did they change the word math to maths with an apostrophe, yes? Okay. Okay, it's definitely not for the UK. Participants, measures. Are we gonna get the 9 things? Oh, here they are. Okay, so we have like listening to a lecture in math class. Compare with. Listening to a maths lecture. Or reading a maths book. Where's the reading one? Starting a new chapter in a math book. Okay, so none of them are actually reading a math book. Did they change starting a new chapter? New chapter is like emphasis on new. It's like now we have to deal with a new material. Like we're moving on to the next shit in the unit. Which is different than reading a math book. So they made a major change here that they just snuck in with no... They don't actually tell you they made a major change. They just said they made it age appropriate. How is changing from reading a new chapter to a whole book age appropriate change? That's dishonest and fucked up. But that's very typical of psych studies. Anyway, what they generally do in psych studies is instead of using their own questionnaire or whatever, then if they did that, they would face questions like, isn't this a total piece of shit? So what they do is they use someone else's, and then they give a citation saying that it works pretty good. And they don't worry about whether it works, and they don't explain how they know it works or why it works or anything. They don't argue their case. They just cite that someone else said it was good, and they're just relying on the authority of their citation. Which, if the citation had actual good arguments, that would work if you did the same thing as what you cited, which they did not do. They changed it. So even if this paper was any good and the measure was good and so on, it still wouldn't work for them because they changed it and they lied about the change. This was not making it age appropriate. They made a larger change than that. Changing from chapter to book is not an age change. And also, listening to a maths lecture instead of listening to a lecture in math class, how is that an age appropriate thing? Are they saying that people don't have class anymore? They changed it to like a UK formulation with maths. But they didn't change like number 1 to maths book with an apostrophe S. So did they make it inconsistent? Like, is their new study, like question 1 has math book and then later has maths lecture? Like they're using UK terminology sometimes and US terminology sometimes? Or did they adapt all the questions and they only mentioned adapting 2 of them? This seems so fucked up. So now they're using a 4-point scale instead of a 5-point scale. Why? Which one's better? Does it matter? Do they have any like conceptual understanding of whether it should be a 4-point scale or a 5-point scale? Why just like randomly change it between different measures? I mean, I think it's because they just used someone else's and the other people happen to use 5 in one case and 4 in another case. But I think it's bad that they're just varying things for no particular reason with no explanation of what's good or why. So they have things like understanding graphs protect in newspapers and solving an equation like 3x plus 5 equals 17. So x is 4. It had good internal validity, but they're not going to mention retest reliability this time, apparently. So I guess they didn't check test retest reliability or something. Like that shows that their argument spaghetti stuff. It's like when they have 2 measures that are good, they mention both of them. When they have 1 measure that's good, they mention that one and ignore the other one. Like it doesn't matter this time. That's dishonest. That's biased. That isn't scientific rigor and objectivity. I look forward to my mathematics lessons. By the way, the previous one was a 4-point scale from 0 to 3, and now we have a 4-point scale from 1 to 4. And they're just randomly changing it, like 0 to 3, 1 to 4. Why change it? And honestly, if you're dealing with people with math anxiety, why the fuck would you use 0-based counting? That makes no sense. Asking them to deal with 0 when they're math anxious or whatever, or a bunch of them are or something, like why would you do that? Just let them deal with normal 1-based counting. So one of the things here is they don't check negative statements like I hate mathematics. They might find that they get different answers based on whether they're asking about positive statements or negative statements. Like the answers might be inconsistent. Also, they claim to have their good internal validity, which I don't know what that is. They haven't explained it. And they haven't given a citation that explains it or like a footnote that explains it or something. But well, it might be explained in here. Let's see. So here we have internal consistency. Test, retest, reliability. No, that just says it was good. They're saying what the measures were. Oops. Okay, so they're saying internal validity, but this thing they cited talks about internal consistency and convergent and divergent validity. What about internal validity? Is that a thing? How long is this? It's not very long. Validity. They're literally changing the terminology. Like, the terminology did not have internal validity. It had internal consistency, and which is, by the way, what I guessed earlier that internal validity might mean. So it has that. And it has a different type of validity, convergent and divergent. And they just changed the metrics, or the naming or whatever. But this one doesn't actually explain what those things mean. It just says what the results were. So I could look them up, but okay, this is under confusing stats terms explained. So someone who knows what they are thinks they're confusing. Internal consistency refers to general agreement between multiple items. They make up a composite score. This is generally measured by the correlation between items. So basically it means if you ask a bunch of positive questions and then their answers correlate, like the people who answered yes on the first one also answer yes on the second one, that's good internal validity. Whereas if they answered like half yes and half no, that would be bad internal validity. Internal consistency is a much better term that makes more sense. Anyway, so that's sort of what I thought it was. Anyway, all of these are terrible at like judging math and like they don't cover math interest very well because they're all abstract, hypothetical, and vague and general purpose. And also, the first one is about math lessons, which sets the stage for people to assume the other ones are also about math lessons. But if you had asked them about doing math in some real life situation that they actually cared about, you might get different answers. See, when you say I do mathematics because I enjoy it, they're thinking of spending your time like doing math problems. They're not thinking about using math in your artwork. Like using geometry to help you make a better painting when you're a painter or something. They're not thinking that's what they mean by math. Like they're just associating it with school math, doing busy work for school that's not associated with any of your other interests. And when they say interested in the things I learn in math, again, it's just like learning how to do long division. But they're not asking about learning how to use math to do the architecture you're interested in. Like some people like to make floor plans, and you can actually use math in floor plans to help figure out like what fits where and stuff. Like you can add up the lengths of two pieces of furniture and figure out whether they'll fit in a space or not. Because it's like 6 feet plus 3 feet is 9 feet, so yes, that will fit in a 10-foot space, but not in an 8-foot space. That is math, but that is not what these things are asking about. They're asking very like specifically about school math lessons, shit like that. So it's not actual mathematics interest, it's school math interest. So the basic thing they're studying is people are anxious about and hate school math. It doesn't actually tell you about like math in other contexts. But they're not saying that. They present it as math in general when they're actually studying like a specific type of math. But then this one about newspapers is a general thing. So they're actually inconsistent with their own stuff. Because this was all of the items. This was the entire survey for this thing. But then for this other one, they just have a completely different type of thing. So they do not have good internal consistency for what they're even trying to study. So this fits with the general theme that these people are stupid and incompetent and don't know how to do research. Like they should not be scientists. They don't know what they're doing at all. is really bad. Like, science cannot make progress with work like this. This has negative value. Like, we would know more if this did not exist. It's leading people astray. It's misleading people. There are smart people, like Stukio, who retweeted it, which is how I found it. There it is. See, Stukio retweeted. So Stukio is a smart person who probably could see what was wrong with the paper if he read it carefully and spent a few hours on it. My guess is he could find problems. I don't know exactly how he'd analyze it and what he'd do, but like, he's smart enough to understand some of these issues. And he's getting fooled by this shit. He's just retweeting it. He probably never looked at it. And so it's hurting his understanding of the world. Tom Harrigan followed you. That name seems familiar. I think I've heard of him before, but I'm not sure. I could easily be wrong. There is not much accountability. The accountability stuff is pretty terrible. In my stream yesterday, I looked at 2 Princeton professors, so they have plenty of like status and shit, unlike me. Wrote like a 2-page criticism of some paper, and they pointed out how it made basic math errors, so it was just wrong. And the thing they were saying was in line with current SJW positions, because the paper said no racial bias for police, and they said your argument is wrong, so there could be racial bias for police. You haven't told us one way or another. So it's not going to piss the SJWs off. It's on this site. It's, compatible with SJWs. They're high status Princeton professors, and they tried to publish like a short, very clear correction, and the paper said, no, fuck off. We're not listening. So that's how bad accountability is. Possibly the reason that they were ignored is because they used Bayesian arguments, and it might be a frequentist journal or something that hates Bayesians, which is stupid. So yeah, Stukio retweeted this shit. But it's doing harm. Yeah, science is pretty broken, but it's especially like social quote sciences. Like, there's a reason people make fun of social science in general. Alright, where was I? I was here. Okay, so previously they were talking about twin pairs, and now they've given a number of twins, which is an odd number, which is interesting. Why do you have an odd number of twins? I thought we were studying pairs of twins. Why would you recode them on a scale of 4 to 11 instead of like 1 to 7? Or 1 to 8? That's odd. Okay, and so they're missing some data, but they think it doesn't matter very much. But they just say it's unlikely to constitute a bias. Like, how unlikely? Did you do math? Like, if you're gonna say it doesn't matter because you have an argument that it doesn't matter, then you have to give the argument, and that's not a matter of probability. If you're gonna say it's unlikely, then you're getting into probability, and you should have some mathematical calculation, and you should say how likely you think it is. Like, it's 0.1% likely to matter or whatever. Okay, so people actually misreported stuff between, like, around correlations. Like, a few percent of the time, people misreported their scores. Wait, and it's worse than that. This isn't just how often the score was wrong at all. This is the correlation. So they're saying that the scores that were reported were pretty close to the actual scores. So there could actually be a lot of people who are a little bit off. On the other hand, it could be like one person reported a score that was like way, way lying, and it threw off the correlation like significantly. Anyways, so like this is a small source of error, and they say it doesn't matter because it's small. And then this is a small source of error, and they say it doesn't matter because it's small. They don't actually say that, but that's what they mean. Like they just don't even comment, but what they're trying to say is it's small, so it doesn't matter, don't worry about it. However, how many small sources of error did they have? Because if you add up, 500 small sources of error, your study's probably broken. How many small sources of error does it take before your results are wrong? Because these things are additive. Like, you're getting wrong. Well, they might be additive. They could add up. That's a potential thing. If the errors are random, then they'd be as likely to be wrong in the positive direction as the negative direction. So they'd cancel each other out to some extent. Probably. There's a probability that that would happen. But they might not just be random errors. Like, it could be that the people who don't report ungraded or unclassified could be people with bad scores, let's say, hypothetically. I could also imagine good scores. But say they're bad scores, and then the people who misreport their own grades could also be people with bad scores. So this could be correlated things rather than independent things. Online test battery assessed mathematics performance with 3 tests: understanding numbers, problem verification, and approximate number sense. So they say stuff like this a lot. The test was developed to assess a certain thing. What we're supposed to take from this is that it does assess that thing. They meant it to assess it. That was their intention, their design, their purpose, their goal. They're supposed to believe it's actually good at it because they tried to make it good at it or something. It's not an argument that it is good at it. It's just their intention. 18 math problems, ascending level of difficulty. Multiple formats, equations to problems. Ranging from equations to problems. What does that mean? What are the multiple formats that, how do you range over math formats from equations to problems? What is, like, what goes in the middle there? And what are problems even, and how they, isn't an equation a type of problem? So this is like fucking incoherent, and again just shows they don't have attention to detail. Like they just can't really think coherently. So it was multiple choice or type a number in a box. Denise has thought of 2 numbers. The numbers added together make 23. The smaller number subtracted from twice the larger number makes 22. What are Denise's numbers? So x plus y equal 23, and two x minus y equal 22, and x greater than y. Okay, so y equal x, or 23 minus x, and then you substitute that in. You got so 3x plus, wait, did I do it wrong? Oh, okay, yeah. The negative only applies. 3x minus 23 equal 22. So 3x equal 55. X equal, no, 45. X equal 15, which means y equal 8 from the first equation. Okay, at least they got their problem right. Good reliability in the present sample? What does that mean? They just made up another, like, term, and they're not explaining what it means. The problem verification test presented participants with a series of mathematical equations appearing for 10 seconds on a computer screen. Okay, so their problem solving was based on whether they could do stuff in 10 seconds. No wonder these kids are so nervous. You're giving them 10-second time limits. Good reliability in the current sample, whatever the fuck that means. The appropriate number sense test. Approximate, not appropriate. 150 trial. Jesus, they must have gotten so bored. That's one of the things they do wrong is, like, they get people who don't want to be there and then they make them really bored. And they paid them, like, very little or not enough for nothing or... Like, I wonder if... Okay, so they did tests in, ascending order of difficulty previously. Which means it's hard to tell the difference between... One, they did worse on the later problems because they were harder, and two, they did worse on the later problems because they were bored and didn't care anymore. And they were tired and stuff like that. Anyways, so with the 150, it would be good if they actually tried to check for that kind of thing, like see if performance goes down on later trials. Displaying arrays of yellow and blue dots. Trials lasted 400 milliseconds. Wait, their idea of number sense is you look at a bunch of dots and then you guess how many dots there were. Oh, whether there were more yellow or blue. This is that's not what number sense is. Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's true, Zhao. They could be, like, in the groove later. Especially now that I realize they're getting 400 millisecond trials where they get something flashed on the screen for less than half a second. And then they have to say which one had more dots. That's, and they're using yellow and blue. Yellow is hard to see on screen sometimes. Like, what was the background color? Was it white? Did the yellow blend into the white background? And so they have varying sizes. I want to see, like, a picture of what this looked like. Because you can make it really hard to tell what there's more of in a fraction of a second if you have, like, varying sizes, dots, varying colors, varying arrangement. You're glancing at two groups at once. This is so bad. Anyways, yeah, this is very typical that the measures they use are terrible. There's so many things wrong with them. Okay, in general anxiety, they had some scale. How often in the past month have you been bothered by the following problems? Not being able to control worrying, feeling afraid as if something awful might happen. See, this kind of surveying doesn't measure anxiety. It measures, like, how anxious you think you are if you're being honest. Something like that. Like, there are some people who, like, are in denial about their anxiety. So they're going to say, oh no, that doesn't happen to me, I'm happy. But there are other people who are, like, you know, goth or something, and they, like, want to emphasize how anxious they are. They're like, yeah, I got a lot of problems. Life sucks so much, man. Even though they're actually recently happy. So that's one of the problems with this stuff. It has good internal validity and retest, reliability. Is R equal 0.64 actually good? That doesn't sound good to me. That sounds bad. This is test, retest reliability, meaning you ask the same person the same questions. And I think that means their answers just vary significantly. That sounds terrible. We could look up what alpha and R actually mean, but I don't care that much. Like, it's so bad it doesn't really matter. Like, you don't have to go into that level of detail to actually refute this article. Analyses. I want to get to the part where the twin method allows for decomposition of individual differences in a trait into genetic and environmental sources of variance by capitalizing on the genetic relatedness between monozygotic twins who share 100% of their and DZ twins. The method is further grounded. By the way, notice that they say it's not that they share 50% of the same genes. They share 50% of the same ones that differ between individuals. But they're only looking at the variation. If 90% of everyone's genes are like the same, then they're saying of the remaining 10% where people vary, they'll be half the same and half different. I mentioned something similar earlier. Method is further grounded in the assumption that both types of twins were raised in the same family share their rearing environments to approximately the same extent. So if you're raised in the same family, you're in the same environment, is their assumption, which is just false. Like, sometimes one kid in a family goes to a private school and one goes to a public school. Or they're in different classes and they have different teachers. You get significantly different environments. Or like one is the parent's favorite and they get treated differently all the time. One gets bought more stuff than the other. One might be injured and then be treated differently. One might have a bad experience, like they get lost in a store and the parent has to go up front and they call them on the loudspeaker and they find the kid, and it was like a slightly traumatic experience. You know, there are a variety of things that could happen that are bad that could happen to one kid and not the other. And then the parent could be like extra worried about the kid and like hover more and treat the two kids differently. Anyways. No, it's not. They just say it's possible. They don't explain how it's possible or what they did or how that would possibly work. They do mention that they're talking about relative contribution to variation in the trait. But they don't define relative contribution. Heritability, the amount of variance in a trait that can be attributed to. Can be attributed to. What does that mean? Does that mean you don't have to attribute it? You just could? It's optional? It's not the amount that is attributed or is caused by. Anyway, they definitely avoid the word cause a lot. Intuitively calculated is double the difference between MZ and DZ twin interclass correlations. Wait, so shared environment describes the extent to which twins raised in the same family resemble each other beyond their shared genetic variance. Non-shared environment describes environmental variances that does not contribute to similarities between twin pairs. Okay, but that's fucking ridiculous. So non-shared environment should mean... Wait. What did they say about this at the beginning? Let's search for shared. Oh, they didn't talk about it earlier? What did they talk about? It was on their chart, right? Shared environment and non-shared environment. They seem to treat shared environment as like family, but shared culture is also shared. Like, I've seen, like, twins raised apart stuff trying to say that if they're raised apart, then they don't share environment or something. Anyway. I've looked into some of the stuff in detail before, and it was total crap that doesn't actually work. They're doing a bad job of explaining it, so it's hard to evaluate. You'd have to, like, look at all the stuff they're citing to find out what their method actually is, because they don't actually explain their own method enough. So, shared environment involves the same family, but non-shared environment involves things that don't contribute to similarity. That doesn't make sense because it doesn't cover all the types of environment. You could have non-family environment that contributes to similarities. These are not like the standard definitions, I don't think, because I've read about shared and non-shared before. I don't think these are the standard statements of what they mean. They switch models based on, like, one model's not working well, they switch to a different one. That's very suspicious. They're like, if we get a good correlation, we're going to report success. If we don't, we're going to say, oh, that means something else must be going on, so we'll try a different thing. And then if it works, we'll report success. So they're just looking for, can any of our things possibly work to get what we're going to call success? Rather than thinking, why did this not work? Maybe that means we're wrong. Oh, my Reaper settings. These are my Reaper settings. I'll just put them on I am. Oops. Ah! It opened my IMs on the wrong screen after I accidentally quit them. Okay, so you have to be careful about opening software that could have something private while streaming, because it switched screens. It was previously on a different screen. But it makes sense that it would open on the screen I'm currently using, I think. Anyway. So to properly criticize this, what you have to do is figure out what their method is and how it's supposed to work, and then point out why it doesn't work. And they're doing very little help with that. And I've looked into it in the past for this kind of thing, but I don't really feel like going into a ton of detail right now because their study's so bad anyways. But if people have, like, more detailed questions or they want to look into it themselves, how the MZ and DZ shit works, you're welcome to look into it and then ask questions, and I could probably help. But the short answer is all the stuff they're saying does not work. Which is actually like a lot more important than the other problems and affects like a lot more studies. But part of why it doesn't work is explained in this article. This points out a lot of problems with the correlation studies and shit. It specifically deals with heritability, which they mentioned a little while ago. And they're trying to talk about genetic contributions. That's heritability related. And by the way, this is by an academic from CMU. It's not like obscure. It has like appropriate prestige and social status. He was one of the co-authors of a book criticizing the bell curve. He helped put together. It's this book. Well, the link seems to be broken. Maybe he should have linked to Amazon, and then maybe it would still work. There's 4 editors mentioned, but if we look inside table of contents, then we have like a bunch of different people. And it is Cosmo Shalizi wrote that particular article. Where is he? I wanted to find out what chapter he wrote. I didn't see his name. I wonder if they made like a new version of the book and got different contributors or something. This post is like from 2007. And I don't know when the original book was from. So when is this book from and what is this? Well, this is from 1997. I just didn't see him on the list. Wait, is this the right book? Intelligence leads to success. Scientists respond to the bell curve. Yeah, it's the right book. What? I didn't see him in the table of contents. There was like a chapter that didn't say a name. Felizi, 0 hits. Is that how you spell it? Where's like the about page or whatever? I didn't know there were new posts on this blog. These are from 2019. Anyway, it's Cosma Shalizi. So search inside. Cosma. Okay. This is weird though. He said he was a contributor to the book. And I'm not seeing him. It referenced three-toed sloth thing. It links to that website. The departmental page. Teaching. I was looking for publications. Let's search for like respond or like bell. Wait. Oh, he wasn't a contributor. They were people who were from his department. Some of the people who will be voting on my contract renewal and tenure were involved in the book. So he agrees with some of his like supervisors and superiors and shit. Okay, so I misread it. That explains everything. Anyways, he's doing it as like a full disclosure because of a potential bias. So they like to make these kind of summary charts because by the time they have this chart, they are the chart leaves out like all the stuff they glossed over, like that their survey questions are shit. It leaves out the fact that they used surveys, you know, etc., etc. It leaves out all the details where they were wrong. So you could see like something was crap, like that their number sense thing that they call number sense test was not a number sense test in any like normal meaning of the term number sense. Like I've talked with people about number sense who like teach it and deal with trying to help students have better number sense, and the thing they teach and they want students to have a skill at is not ability to glance for a fraction of a second at dots and estimate which group of dots there were more of. That is not at all what number sense means. So they're essentially lying by using a completely non-standard meaning of number sense, and they don't even try to explain why it's any good or what they think number sense means. They just label it with the term number sense, which has a different meaning, and then make a graph and totally ignore the problem. And so they also they don't seem to be considering why on earth would shared environment be a factor on the GCSE but not on the UN, PVT, NS, MA, any of the other things? Like that doesn't make sense. Why would it factor into one of these things but none of the others? They're giving no explanation of why it'd be literally zero factor on any of these other things. You should address, you should look at your data and say, does this make sense? And then think about it. But they're not doing that. They're just like, we did math, these are our results. The end. But they didn't just do math. They did things like survey question design, where they changed a question from being about reading a new math chapter to reading a math book, among other changes. Here they use moderate, and then they use modest. So it's again, like I was talking about earlier, where they randomly change terminology and use a bunch of synonyms. To me, this means that they don't have a set of standard words where a certain range counts as weak, a certain range as moderate, and a certain range as strong. You know, they didn't actually define what ranges get what words. They just threw words on the numbers with no real system to it. So I think that's really bad. Anyway, they claim to do some statistics, which somehow told them what was caused by what. That is bullshit. They also didn't decide in advance what analysis they would do. They took the data set first, and then they tried a variety of types of analysis until they got numbers they liked, which is cheating. But if they weren't doing that, they would have said so. Like, you don't just admit that you did it right and didn't cheat. You would mention that. And they keep saying things that sort of suggest they're cheating. Okay, discussion. All they did is they said, all right, we're going to use the crap other people do in general, and we're going to use it specifically on this anxiety stuff because no one has yet taken these standard bad techniques and done them to anxiety. And then also, we're going to be incompetent and cite a satire of our field. But basically, they didn't do any thinking. They just took techniques other people use, and then they applied them to a specific thing that they hadn't been applied to yet because it's so dumb and no one cared. That's what I think is basically going on here. And that's their idea of research and earning their paychecks. They found something they could do that hadn't been done yet. Which, by the way, that general attitude results in a lot more bad science because everyone's trying to do something different and new rather than like checking for errors and stuff. They want to have like positive results. We proved something rather than checking each other's work for errors. So they keep using this overlap term, which they've never explained. They have all these citations to other research, but they don't have footnotes explaining what they mean by their technical terms. And I think some of them are non-standard and can't just be looked up. Like, they seem to use words in somewhat random ways. Like, they were using internal validity instead of internal consistency. You can't just look up what the technical term means because it's not a standard term. I don't even know how to look this up. I think it's just another word for referring to correlations. Contribute is another word that they use for correlation. Like, they do so much to make it sound like there's causation, but they're just looking at correlations. And correlation does not imply causation, no matter what statistics you do. And there's obvious causations that could be causing this correlation other than the one they're claiming. Like, they're claiming basically that the anxiety is causing math problems, like being bad at math or whatever, but it could so easily be the other way around, that being bad at math is causing the math anxiety. And they're claiming genes cause this stuff, partially. But their data is perfectly consistent with like culture being the dominant issue. Like, the main issue could be how mean math teachers are and how shitty their textbooks are and stuff like that. And if you change those things, then all your gene correlations might just completely change. And everything they're doing is compatible with that. They do not contradict it or refute it. Which is basically explained in the Shalizi post. They only talk in jargon from their field, so they're obscuring what they're actually doing. What they really are saying is simply, we did a lot of the same methods that other people have done, and we're not going to explain what they are, how they work, why we think they're any good, etc. And nor are we going to give a specific reference to something that explains all that. Like, they keep citing studies on specific topics which use the same approach as they do, and talk in a similar way and so on, but they never cite, here's a thing that explains what we're doing and why it actually works. And if this is wrong, we're wrong. They don't want to give like a clear summary or overview of what they're doing. I think they would say, oh, if you don't know that, fuck off. You're not educated, just read psych textbooks. But if you actually like look through a bunch of psych textbooks, you're going to find varying terminology, varying claims, and it'll be hard to actually find specifically stuff that fits with everything they're saying because they're not precise. They don't carefully follow anything. So it's a big problem. And when you find that some psych textbook doesn't match what they say, they can say, oh, well, you should read a different psych textbook. That's not our favorite one, or whatever. Because they don't actually pick one and cite it. If they picked a specific one and cited it, then you could point out mismatches and it would be a real problem. But if they do not cite any particular literature that they're claiming to be compatible with and use the same terminology as and use the same methods as and so on, if they're not saying the explanations are there, then they can always say, well, that one's wrong, you should read other books, get a more modern, up-to-date one, get a one by a different author, blah, blah, blah. And they can also say, that one is incomplete, you need to look in other sources, etc. There's no good way to check their work because they're not specific about what their prerequisites or foundational knowledge actually are. And they have so many references, but they're not for explaining terminology or explaining like underlying methodology or anything like that. They just keep citing other research that also doesn't explain itself very well in general. Like there might be a couple sites that are different. I haven't, gone through all of them, but the current investigation presents some limitations, as well as relying on the methodological assumptions of twin design. Okay, so they actually have a twin design related site. The models employed in the current investigation do not specifically account for gene-environment interplay. Right, so they just completely ignored gene-environment interactions. So all of their conclusions are utterly and completely false and bullshit and dishonest, and they should never publish them. That is the actual thing going on here. Genes and environment have interplay. This is a fact. This is well known. It's basically obvious. And they decided to completely ignore it and publish anyways. This is why they're wrong. They know they're wrong. They already know why they're wrong and that they're wrong. They don't care. They publish anyways because they have nice charts. This is one of the main things talked about by Shalizi. So they already know that. They know they're bullshitting. They're frauds on purpose because publish or perish or whatever. See, they know they're wrong. They know why they're wrong. They can actually explain. This is one of the most coherent things in the whole paper, and they're explaining why their paper is bullshit. They just mentioned as a minor limitation the fact that everything they said is bullshit. They don't say how big a limitation it is. Oh, they mentioned that it wasn't at the same time, too. They measured stuff years apart. Conclusions. Okay, so will they conclude that due to the limitations, their survey is invalid and should be thrown out? Question mark. No, they're bragging about how they were first to do something. Likely domain-specific etiology, blah, blah, blah. A seminal step for future genetic research. Like, they know that they're wrong. They know that they just completely ignored a huge factor. And then they call it a seminal step for future genetic research. It will help people delve deeper into observed common genetic links, examining how experiential processes. Blah, blah, blah. Majority of genetic variants implicated in individual differences are unlikely to be implicated in variation in general anxiety. No conflict of interest. Seriously? It is in the interest of their career that their study does not have errors. So that's a conflict of interest. They really couldn't think of any conflict of interest. Okay, and then there's that site 47. I'm gonna take a brief look at it at least. The classical twin study is the most popular design in behavioral genetics. It has strong roots in biometrical genetic theory, as well as predictions to be made about the correlations between observed traits of identical and fraternal twins in the terms of underlying genetic and environmental components, given that you completely ignore gene-environment interactions, as they admitted in the other paper. The assumptions of the twin method. Gene-environment correlations and interactions are minimal for the trait. They're saying there's just no interaction between any sort of genes and people's and any sort of culture that is related to people's math anxiety. This is simply a false assumption. So they have a false assumption that they know is an assumption they're making, and they do not do any significant analysis of whether it's true or false in their case. The only analysis of it in the paper that I just read was where they basically admitted that they ignored it and they had no reason that it would be minimal. They didn't give any explanation of why they think it's minimal for math anxiety. Matings in the population occur at random. Well, that's false, and we know that's false. That's utterly fucking false. They have two blatantly false assumptions for their twin method. And this is the general twin method used by tons and tons of psychology stuff. Which they said earlier, that this is most popular design in behavioral genetics, and those are two of the limitations, and they are false in general. And so most studies in behavioral genetics are false. It's as simple as that. What the fuck is all that stuff on the link? Does it work without all that stuff? It does not. Token was not provided. Oh well. Here, have this one instead then. Yeah, this PDF link works. Okay, and I'm gonna save copies of stuff. I'm gonna stop streaming soon, so if you have any questions, ask now. And then this, I wanted to find the preview PDF. Download PDF. I want to save this. Okay, did I need to save anything else? Oh, there was the, I'll save this. Where is it? I wanted to save this one as well. Where's that? Desktop. I have not done a huge amount of research on editing software. I think Final Cut Pro is pretty good and works well for what I do. If you were doing like a professional movie, like a Hollywood movie with a big budget, you would want to do like a lot more research. Some of the other ones have more fancy advanced stuff, I think. Maybe. I think it's used for some Hollywood movies, but it's not like the most popular or anything. But like that kind of feature is generally not relevant for me. So I've had a good experience with Final Cut Pro. And it has the reason I picked it is it has a Apple interface. Like I want a Mac oriented interface that is nice to use when the features are, fine either way. I don't want to use Adobe's shitty interface design or there's like Sony Vegas, which also is not going to be as nice of an interface as Mac stuff in general. I guess that one is overcoming math anxiety. Okay, I've got some papers saved on my desktop. I'll sort them later. We can close that. What is this? Oh, this is the racial profiling shit that I looked at previously. Internet, if you're interested in watching videos, you should get my videos of me making videos. How I make videos. So I made like 3 YouTube videos and I recorded me making the videos, so you can see video editing. Most of my stuff uses less video editing than that, but that is my more editing kind of thing. I forgot exactly what I said, but I meant if you want to make videos, like if you want to do video editing, then yeah, watch these and you'll get some idea of what it looks like and how to make some stuff. Most of what I do though is very minimal editing, like I just run it through an automated silence remover and I don't really, do much editing. Okay, I'm out. Bye.